In 1971, a team of scientists was given permission to open a sealed container inside a small Italian church. The container had not been properly examined in over 1,200 years. What they found inside stopped them cold, and in the decades since, no one has been able to fully explain it. This is the story of Lanciano, and by the end, you will understand why the debate is still open. The town of Lanciano sits on the Adriatic coast of central Italy. It is not a famous place. Most tourists pass through without stopping. But inside one of its churches, the Church of San Francesco, there are two glass reliquaries, two containers, sitting on the same altar for more than 12 centuries. One holds what appears to be a small ring of dried flesh, about the size of a large coin. The other holds 5 small, irregularly shaped pellets. They appear to be solidified blood. They have been there, according to tradition, since approximately 700 AD. Stay with me, because the story of how they got there is not what you expect. Sometime around the year 700, the exact date is not recorded, a monk was celebrating Mass in a small church in Lanciano. He belonged to the Basilian tradition, the monastic order founded by Saint Basil the Great. We do not know his name. History never gave it to us. What history did preserve is something far more uncomfortable. He did not believe. Not exactly. He believed enough to wear the robes. He believed enough to show up. He believed enough to perform every step of the ritual with his hands, his posture, his voice. But in his mind, privately, silently, he thought, "This is bread. This is wine. These are only symbols." You have to understand what that means in Catholic doctrine. The Mass is not a ceremony of remembrance. According to the Church, the moment a priest speaks the words of consecration over the bread and wine, those elements are believed to truly, substantially become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The teaching is called transubstantiation. It has been the core of Catholic worship since the earliest centuries. The Church Father Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 110 AD, described the Eucharist as the flesh of our Savior Jesus Christ. It was never framed as metaphor. This monk knew all of this. He had studied it, prayed it, and taught it, and he no longer felt it was real. Here's what most people miss about a crisis of faith. It rarely arrives as a dramatic rejection. It arrives as a quiet hollowing out. You keep doing the motions, you keep saying the words, but something inside has gone cold. That is exactly where this monk was, standing at an altar, performing a sacred ritual he privately doubted, when something reportedly happened. According to every historical account we have of this event, the moment the monk spoke the words of consecration, the host changed. The round piece of unleavened bread appeared to become a piece of flesh. The wine in the chalice appeared to become blood, which then visibly thickened into 5 small, uneven pellets. He reportedly could not move. For a long moment, the congregation waited in silence, and then, according to the historical record, the monk turned to face them. He was said to be shaking. His eyes were wet. He said, "O fortunate witnesses, come, brethren, and marvel at our God so close to us." Now, whatever you believe about that moment, keep this question in the back of your mind as we go forward. What happened to the flesh and blood after that? The relics were preserved. They were placed in sacred containers and kept in the church where the event reportedly occurred. Over the following centuries, the church changed hands. Different religious orders took custody. The town of Lanciano changed and grew. Wars moved through the region. Plagues came and went. The reliquaries stayed. By the time of the Renaissance, 700 years later, the relic was already ancient. By the Enlightenment, it had reportedly survived for close to 1,000 years. And through all of that time, witnesses across multiple centuries consistently described the same thing. Not bone, not cloth, not ash, but soft tissue and solidified blood, present and visible. This is the first thing that requires an explanation. Under normal conditions, organic material, flesh and blood, decays within days. Without refrigeration, without chemical treatment, without any of the tools of modern preservation. The substance in Lanciano should have been completely unrecognizable within a week of whatever event produced it in the 8th century. It wasn't. Pay attention to this. Because this was precisely the question a team of scientists in 1971 set out to investigate. In November of 1970, the Catholic Church formally authorized a scientific investigation of the relics. The lead investigator was Professor Odoardo Linoli. He was not a priest. He was not a theologian. He was a professor of anatomy, pathology, and chemistry. He was assisted by Professor Ruggero Bertelli, a professor of human anatomy at the University of Siena. These were forensic professionals, trained in the same methods used to examine bodies in criminal investigations. They expected to find degraded organic residue, ancient material, perhaps something that could no longer be identified at all. That is not what they found. Their findings, published in 1971, would become one of the most discussed and most quietly ignored scientific reports in the history of religious investigation. The flesh, they concluded, was real human tissue, not generic tissue, not animal tissue, specifically cardiac muscle tissue, the heart wall, the muscular layer of the left ventricle. Let that settle for a moment. Not a fragment of bone, not skin, not connective tissue, but the specific interior muscle of a human heart, a tissue type that requires detailed microscopic analysis to even identify correctly. The blood was confirmed as real human blood, type A-B. And here's the part nobody tells you. The flesh and the blood shared the same blood type, both A-B. The same blood type, incidentally, found in separate analyses of the Shroud of Turin, though no direct comparative testing between these two objects has ever been formally conducted. Each of those findings raised questions. But then the investigators reached the 5th finding, and the story became something else entirely. The 5 pellets of blood were physically different from one another. Different shapes, different sizes. By every visual measure, they were unequal objects. So the investigators weighed them. First, they weighed each pellet individually. Then, they weighed them in pairs. Then in groups of 3. Then all 5 together. The numbers should have varied. With objects of different sizes, the weights should have been different. They were not. According to the published report, each individual pellet weighed exactly the same as any combination of the others. 1 pellet equaled 2 pellets. 2 equaled 3. Any single piece equaled all 5 combined. The investigators checked their instruments. They repeated the measurements. The result held every time. No conventional scientific explanation has been offered for this, not in 1971, not in the decades since. The property described in that report does not correspond to any known behavior of physical matter. The deeper the investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Professor Linoli's overall conclusion was careful but clear. The findings were inconsistent with any known natural process of preservation. The tissue was not derived from any animal source. The proteins in the blood had not broken down the way ancient biological material is expected to break down. His conclusion, stated plainly, science could describe what the material was. It could not explain how it got there. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the story takes a turn that no one talks about. In 1973, the Higher Council of the World Health Organization conducted its own review of Linoli's findings. An independent body, no religious affiliation. They examined 500 samples over 15 months. Here is what they concluded. They did not overturn Lannoli's findings. They also did not confirm them as scientifically extraordinary. They produced no counter-explanation. They identified no error in the methodology. They offered no alternative analysis of what the tissue or blood actually was. They simply moved on. Think about what that means. If the findings were wrong, if the tissue was not human, if the blood type was misidentified, a 15-month WHO review would have found it. That is exactly what such a review exists to do. It found nothing to overturn. But if the findings were right, if cardiac tissue genuinely survived 12 centuries without preservation, if blood genuinely behaved in ways that defy physical law, that would rank among the most significant scientific findings of the 20th century. It was not treated that way either. The case was left open, unresolved, neither confirmed nor dismantled, and in the 50 years since, no independent laboratory has returned to it. No modern DNA analysis has been conducted. No 21st century forensic review has been published. The question was not answered. It was set aside. And that silence may be the strangest part of this story. What also matters is this. No scientific challenge has formally overturned Lannoli's core findings. The study sits in the literature, unchallenged, unreplicated, and unresolved. A data point that neither side has fully accounted for. The Church itself has been careful. The relics have been acknowledged and venerated for centuries. But the word miracle carries a specific threshold in Catholic theology, one that requires a formal and separate process of investigation. To this day, Lanciano has not been officially declared a miracle in that strict sense. The language used in church documents has tended toward one word, inexplicable, which is an honest word, if an uncomfortable one. But here's what I want you to sit with before we close. Of all the elements of this story, the flesh, the blood, the science, the silence, the most human part is still the monk, the one whose name we will never know. You might imagine a crisis of faith as a dramatic moment, a thunderclap, a single night where everything collapses. But it rarely works that way. More often, it is slow, gradual. You drift from something that once felt certain, and one morning you are performing the motions of belief while something inside you has already left the building. That is where this monk was. He was not a skeptic writing a treatise. He was not a philosopher testing an argument. He was a priest, a man who had given his life to a specific belief, standing at an altar and privately concluding that the central act of his vocation meant nothing. And then, according to the record, the thing he doubted became undeniable. Whether that is the most comforting story or the most terrifying one may depend entirely on where you are standing. So, what do you do with Lanciano? If you approach it as a believer, the relic does not demand your certainty. It offers something quieter, the possibility that matter and meaning are not as separate as the modern world assumes, that what you cannot see may still be real. If you approach it as a skeptic, you have something genuinely unresolved in front of you. A 1971 forensic report, human cardiac tissue, type A B blood, a weight anomaly with no accepted explanation, and 50 years of silence where a scientific answer should be. And if you approach it as a historian, you have a 1,300-year-old object, a chain of witness testimony crossing 12 centuries, a scientific analysis with no formal rebuttal, and an open question that no one, on either side, has yet closed. The tissue is still there, in the Church of San Francesco, in Lanciano, Italy. The flesh is still there, the blood is still there, and the question, the one the investigators could not answer in 1971, the one the WHO review left open in 1973, the one modern science has not returned to, is still open. It has been open for over 1,300 years, and no one has closed it yet.